Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to a very poignant edition of Piece of Cake. So there in the blue corner is our brother known as Sheikh and
Sheikh, yeah. I'm upgraded. I'm a sheikh now. Abdurraheem
Abdurraheem
Green.
Green.
And in the red corner, I mean, I don't know, I'm red and you're sort of in the white corner or in the, I don't know what corner you are, bro. But in that other corner over there, it's our, mashallah, esteemed doctor.
Esteemed now, mashallah. Abdul Baker.
Abdul Baker. I think esteemed, bro, because to be honest, I have a respect for anybody who seeks a path of knowledge, even if it's, obviously, as long as it's not useless knowledge like magic. But I have a lot of respect for any type of academia and scholarship, even those guys who spend their lives trekking through the jungle, studying, old bones and coming up with different theories of evolution. But the sheer intellectual vigor that is put into studying something on that level, it has to be respected. But anyway, bro, today we're not talking about that, are we? We're talking about our memories of 9/11. 20 years ago to this day, as per the Gregorian calendar, something happened that certainly we would both agree, and we've mentioned it many times because, a lot of our conversations just come back to this event, 9/11. When they say the world is never going to be the same, I mean, only we'll only know in 1,000 years' time if people even remember it. It might just be some sort of like no one will even know what you're talking about. But certainly for most of us, a lot of us, and a lot of people living in the West, and not only the West, many people living in the Muslim world, for reasons we'll be talking about, 9/11 was a huge seismic event. There's no doubt about that. So let's just, instead of talking about the actual, implications of it, which we'll talk about in a little bit, let's start with talking about our memories. So, bro, I mean, it's one of those things people say, everyone remembers the day, they were doing when, Kennedy was killed. Obviously, I don't think I was even born then, or maybe just about. Or I do remember when Elvis Presley died.
So do I.
I remember that. I remember,
so do
like, I. Yeah. So, but 9/11, I mean, I'm not trying to be, make it into something, insignificant. Of course, it's significant, but it's one of those things that because of the sheer drama, the sheer scale of it, the sheer horror of it, the sheer horror. What were you doing? What were your memories? What was going through your mind when it happened? Yeah, let's just start with that, bro. What's your memories?
As you know, Abdurraheem, and we will touch upon that.
Yeah.
9/11 and the events of 9/11 came to my doorstep and the Brixton community's doorstep. Literally, that's how it transformed our community. And what happened, and we'll talk about that very shortly. But on that morning, it was a Tuesday morning. The weather was good. My eldest daughter, was starting secondary school for the first time, first year of secondary school. She'd done really well in primary school, and so we took her, and I took her to school in, the old Mayfair Cinema, Bank of Baroda, the school that was there in Tooting, Tooting High Road. So took her there, dropped her off. She was excited. We were excited for her. And then I made my way to St. James's Park, where I was working in the Department for Education. So that normal morning, just with the exception of my eldest daughter starting school. And then I remember as it got to the afternoon, and I worked for the National Grid for Learning, which was the ICT division. I was in middle management. I had a team under me. We were rolling out computers and ICT technology to schools at that time. Smart boards were being rolled out. I was the deputy project manager of a £15 million scheme, becoming project manager. So it was good. It was like, okay, we're in a really cool division of the Department for Education. So technology was at our fingertips at that time. So when we got reports of the first plane hitting the Twin Towers. I remember I was on my computer, a colleague said, has anyone seen the news? Or is anyone reading the news on the internet? And I was like, why? What's happened? And they mentioned that, and he stood up sort of bemusedly. We looked on other news feeds and it was coming in. And I'll never forget him saying this. He said, this sounds like something out of a King Kong movie. I never forget him saying that. And I understood what he meant.
Yeah.
So we carried on just working as normal. Then we heard that there were multiple reports of hijacked planes at the time. This was before the second tower was hit. So we were sitting there. I remember ringing my wife, one of my families, asking are they watching and listening to the news. And I don't remember getting hold of them, but they were when I got hold of them later. Then the second plane hit the towers. At that point, everyone realized something seriously was wrong. The rumors and reports of hijacked planes was a reality. So what we did is that someone said, look, wheel in the TV from the conference room. So we wheeled in the TV to our division. Other members of staff, I remember them, I could see panic on some of their faces, some getting really nervous and asking to be excused. And they went home. They literally went home very, very nervous. I stayed behind. Now you have to understand, Abdurraheem, I wore thobe those days in work because it's very, very open and they didn't mind. I wore thobe that day. Now, as we were standing watching the TV and watching the billowing smoke and fire and flames out of the two towers, I had a sinking feeling. And I'm being really honest with you now. I had a sinking feeling. I was thinking, I hope they're not going to blame the Muslims. And then as the first tower collapsed, they said this, I heard one of the news, I think it's CNN, we were watching at the time, saying this must be the work of Muslim terrorists. So that sinking feeling I had was realized. So as we saw the first towers collapse, and I remember some of the colleagues at work, some started crying, some were like, oh my gosh, and oh my God, and panicking and everything. The other towers collapsed. Then we got news of alerts around us that Canary Wharf, the security had been heightened. So others started going home. I waited. I wanted to wait and see more news was happening, rang that to see that my family were okay. But as I was going home now, Abdurraheem, I left to go home later on, normal hour, and I started walking out towards St. James's Park, which is 2 minutes walk. I walked to St. James's Park. I did a U-turn and I came straight back to the building and I went to the basement where the prayer hall was and I prayed my Asr. Now, I was going to pray my Asr at home, but I said, I said, I don't know if I'm going to make it because I don't know what the mood is now that Islam and Muslims have been put front and center. So I did that U-turn. I went and prayed in the mosque area, the little room that we had downstairs. And then I came back up. Now, when on the platform of St. James's Park, you could cut the atmosphere with a knife. I saw people looking at me. I see, don't worry, my son might come in the back shortly as well. They're
asking me, do I want this for dinner? Do I want that for dinner?
MashaAllah.
No, I don't. I'm fine. Thanks.
So on St. James's platform, I got on the train and I was obviously a very, very observant, and I saw individuals looking at me, looking at my thobe. I saw some distracted, some in fear. And I then went, I didn't go straight home. I went straight to Brixton Mosque and called an emergency meeting as chairman of the mosque with the brothers, the Shura, and I called them in and I said, look, I remember speaking with some of them when they came, and I said, the world as we know it has changed today. That's what I said to them. Maybe they picked up the phrase from you, bro. No, not at all. They were listening in and said, "Oh, that's a good one." But probably. But then, Abdurraheem, what happened is some of the brothers got there. The fear was palpable. Sisters were calling us. Some were crying, saying, "Look, should we remove our hijab? I still have to pick my children up. I don't want to go out." I said, "I'm going to ring the leader of the local council to say, if this is Muslims, this is not from Islam." The fact that I had to think like that because of what was starting to proliferate in the news and everything. So we got to the mosque. That's what we discussed. But you know, when I got out of Brixton Underground Station, And I mentioned this in the khutbah that Friday. Remember, it's a Tuesday. I mentioned it in the khutbah. As I came out of the train station, I saw one of my old school friends, okay? And he knew I was Muslim. He wasn't Muslim. And he looked at me and he said, "How you doing, T?" As he used to call me, T or to be.
Yeah.
And I said, "It's shocking, isn't it?" He goes, "Yeah, the bully got a bloody nose."
Yeah.
Now that stuck with me so much so that when I gave the khutbah on Friday, that following Friday, I mentioned that at the beginning of my khutbah. And I referred to my friend. I said, as one of my non-Muslim colleagues said when I saw him, the bully has got a bloody nose. And it has got us context. But so for me, Abdurraheem, I'll stop at that point there. But I remember also after leaving the mosque, I went and picked up my family, my two families and everything. We went back to one of the homes and we stayed there because we wanted to be secure. I contacted my sister who was petrified. My mother was worried at home that day for our safety and everything. And there was just this sense of fear and panic. But I want those non-Muslims who are possibly listening to know there was a sense of fear, panic, that the backlash was going to be, what was it going to be on us? What was going to happen to us, as well as there was, if it was from amongst our ranks, if you like, what next were they going to do?
Okay. So I think one of the things that really stood out to me from what you, again, it's always so interesting being, having these conversations with you, bro, right? It's so interesting, right? And I'll be frank, the fact that your experience as a Black person is constantly, it just blows my mind basically at how different your experience of life is, how that shapes, honestly, really, if people have doubt about how color and racism can shape a person's outlook and interaction with the world, honestly, you're just not being honest enough. That's what I think it is. Honestly, I just don't think you're being honest enough. And I think the other thing that's really interesting is, which something I appreciate now, which I wouldn't have really understood in the same way then, is, and I would love everybody who's listening, please, to have a really deep think about this, how on a whole different level, there is a whole different level of challenges when it comes to someone who is in a leadership position, right? Now, Abdul Haqq was the head of basically the Emir of Brixton Mosque, which is a pretty large, sizable community of mostly converts. And that is so interesting, bro. Your whole I'm thinking about my story, and then I thought, wow, that is so different. Your experience was so different from mine, because your first thought, okay, you're thinking about your family, but then your first responsibility is to the community. And look, most people will never have any idea how hard it is to be in a leadership level of anything more than maybe looking after your wife and kids, right? That's probably as far as most people on this planet will get in terms of leadership. You start getting a little bit higher than that, right? Being in charge of a village, let alone being in charge of a masjid with how many people?
1,000 plus.
1,000 plus people. That for reason A, B, C, the eyes of the world may well be on your community, and what you say is going to go way, way beyond just those 1,000 people. The level of responsibility, please, I wish everyone would just understand how difficult and how challenging that is. And, I always say, it's so easy to be rude and make judgments about leaders, whatever leaders, whoever they are, right? And, claim they're incompetent and this and that. But the level of responsibility on people's shoulders, right, is just huge. That's the first thing. I had to make that point, bro. And I wish everyone would think about that deeply when it comes to everything, whether it comes to 9/11, when it comes to, terrorism in general, when it comes to, coronavirus, when it comes to anything, being a leader is very difficult. It's very challenging.
And Abdurraheem, Jazakallah khair. I do want to hear your story, but I want to add to that, just to give a context. Shortly afterwards, it became clear that the 20th 9/11 bomber used to attend our mosque.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, there you go.
And not only did it, and he was one of the first that I'd expelled from the mosque because of his extremist views. But not only did he
really
attend
one
that,
of the actual bombers.
Zacharias Moussaoui, he used to come and listen to some of your khutbahs before he became extreme.
Thanks.
So no, before Abdurraheem, we expelled him because of his extreme views. But what happened is that not only did he come to the mosque, but also we were both studying in university at the same time, South Bank University, in the same business faculty. I was doing the MBA, he was doing the business studies master's degree. And before, as he was becoming more, let's say, radicalized, and he was finishing a year ahead of me, he actually asked me one day outside university. As I said, we weren't in the same classes or same cohort, but he said, would I help him write his master's? And I said, no, I'm not helping you at all. I'm not helping you in anything, because he became quite belligerent in his arguments, challenging our understandings and concepts of jihad. But coming back to 9/11 now, he was.
I think we'll come back to that, bro.
He was arrested. He was actually arrested on a visa violation. Okay, and the reason he came to their attention is because when he was taking flight lessons, the flight manual and instructor had only received instructions from him that he wanted to learn how to take off and fly a plane, but he was not interested in landing. This is there documented in his so.
Okay, so let's get back to that, because that's going to bring us on to a really, really important point and a point of discussion. Because, you know, like, it's interesting when I put the poster up for this, you know, for this evening's talk, I got some messages around a particular topic that we're going to talk about afterwards. Yeah. I don't have much to say about my experience. I think yours is just way more, you know, way more interesting, and leads to more interesting discussions. I was just basically, it's interesting, you know, I was picking my kids up from school, basically. They were in Al-Muntada. I was picking my two boys, I think Abdul and Bilal, I think it was. Maybe Isma and Habib, I don't know if they were at school at the time, but I was picking them up from school. And that's when I first heard the news. And then when I went to drop them off, I remember seeing, I think I was sort of watching it through, it was a summer's day. It was summer, 9/11, September the 11th. It was a warm day. I remember watching it through someone's sitting room window, actually watching what was going on, and then going to my in-laws at the time house and seeing it all unfold. I do remember one of the things that stuck in my mind is it really did look like, you know, those videos that you used to see of buildings being demolished, right?
Yes.
So that's something that, you know, I only remember in retrospect that it sort of stuck in my mind. I don't really remember, except just feeling really sick and feeling horrified and really thinking about the people. I think for me, it was the real horror of, you know, what people were experiencing. I didn't really think much about Muslims and what the consequence was going to be and this and that. I didn't think much about that. I guess my real feeling of sort of horror and disgust was about who would do something like that. Like, not I know that there are people who would do something like that, but just the disgust that someone actually would go and do it.
No, absolutely.
And try and rationalize it. So I think those are sort of things, just horror, disgust. I guess that's sort of me. I'm sort of a very sort of absorbed in the moment type of person. So when I see something like that, I actually really feel I'm there. You know what I mean? So
see, that's interesting, Abdurraheem, because as you said, you were able to have that time to process and reflect on how you felt about what you were witnessing. I felt those same things, but I didn't have time to pause and absorb them.
You got to think about.
I just kept thinking, the phone calls that were coming in, making sure everyone was safe, making sure that I represented the community in whatever way I would need to represent the community. That's all that came to mind. As I said, asking brothers, look, please, can you just pause with your families? Can you go? A sister's in distress. She's somewhere public. She's in a state of paralysis. She doesn't want to leave where she is. Can you go and escort her? Single sisters, not so. That was going on. also the wider non-Muslim community in the Brixton area and everything, they were looking at us as though, well, you've lived and existed amongst us. Is this you? And one of the beautiful things, Abdurraheem, that came out from the Brixton community, which I really love, many of them, because we're converts and we're related to many of them, and they saw what Brixton and the community was like, you know yourself. And they actually said, when we saw some of them and they saw we were very apprehensive, they said, we know, when they were hearing that it's Muslims, it's extremists, they said, we know it's not from the likes of you.
Yeah, I think
that
generally,
was really
bro.
reassuring. That's really comforting to know that our local community, the wider Brixton non-Muslim community, were supportive of us, knowing what our fears were, knowing what our concerns were.
Yeah, I think generally, bro, that generally the wider community, if you want to call it that, didn't generally, obviously there has been, obviously a lot of Islamophobia. There were attacks. There were people got killed. Muslims got killed, pushed under railway lines, arson, all sorts of stuff. And then the whole war on terror that followed it has up until now been just pretty, and until right now as we speak, has been horrific. Like, as we speak right now, I just
absolutely.
And on it's still going on. You know? Like until now, I heard that in Birmingham, some masjid had been visited by the prevent for being glad about the Taliban getting into power or something like that. Which come on, seriously, like the British government in a year's 6 months, 7 months time is going to be negotiating with them, right? I'm sure it's going to happen. China's going to recognize the government in not a long time. I mean, seriously, but I mean, and then investigating them under supporting terrorism. I mean, this is the sort of stuff that's going on until today as we speak.
That 20 years on, we see the recent withdrawal of the US and the Brits and everyone.
But I'm just saying that I'm just saying that, but I'm not trying to negate those things and the experiences, because we both know people who have suffered really badly, and unjustly under these laws, and this witch hunt. However, I would say the general public, by and large, not only after 9/11, but in fact even after 7/7, which happened here on British soil, the response generally was pretty good. It was pretty good. I mean, it was. In fact, I want to go back to what you were saying about the bloody nose. I'm sure you probably remember that the US ambassador came on, I don't know who it was, Dimbleby or who was interviewing him. You must have remembered how he came on. There was a live audience. I don't know, it was one of the evening news programs. And the American ambassador was being interviewed, and he left crying in tears because the audience were basically saying, that's what you've treated the Muslims like this. You've done this. You've done that. You invaded these countries. You've done this and that. No. I don't. No, I'll come and get it. I'm gonna eat my dinner and talk at the same time. I told them, don't worry about me. Anyway, so basically, they basically said that the whole audience was saying that, and the guy was left in tears because he couldn't understand, right? But there was this attitude that you keep kicking people around, people are going to do some crazy stuff. Obviously, it doesn't justify it. It doesn't. It's not allowed. I mean, look, and we've said this again and again and again and again. And I've been saying this since I became Muslim, because people forget 9/11 was not the first terrorist attack that was done by Muslims.
No.
If anyone looks back, if you want to look back, you can look at Jamaat Islamiyah in Egypt, who are killing tourists, Japanese tourists, shooting tourists, killing tourists, right? Before 9/11, there was the bombing of the American embassy in Kenya, which a lot of just ordinary Kenyans died. A lot of them, right? Wasn't, so like, this is not a new thing. It's just
but on that, just
was new,
on the Kenyan thing, Abdurraheem.
And we were condemning it back in those days, bro. I just want to say, but I would say, I used to say in the Speaker's Corner, I said, look, this is wrong. Islam forbids this. However, I want you to understand what is happening to these people. right? This is happening to, they're being tortured. They are, you know, having their torturers take the Quran and shred on it in their face and saying, where is Allah now? And like, you know, the horrors, people don't hear this stuff, the
Right.
horrors that were being, you know, like I said, what would happen if someone did that to you? If the police did that to you, if they did that to your family, rape your wife in front of you? So it doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it excusable, right? But you've got to understand that people don't just go around saying, oh, let me blow up somebody today.
No,
It doesn't happen like that. Not from the Tamil Tigers, not from the Stern gang when they were, you know, blowing up British military in you know, when they were trying to establish the state of Israel. Terrorists, who many of them became a future prime minister. Mechan Begin was a leader of one of the, you know, the Zionist designated terrorist groups, right? It's not new in history that these guys who are once upon a time terrorists become leaders of countries, and we have to deal with them. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked, bro. You wanted to say something, and I'm sure.
No, I want to some points. I think that aligns very much with what I want to go back to, coming back on that day. Now, just before I forget, when my one of my brothers at the time, I had to speak to him to ask his wife to go and get my daughter from school because of what was happening. And we saw, lo and behold, later on that day, there was somebody had shot outside the school, and the bullet, I think it's a pellet, had become lodged in the glass above the door where the students would be entering. In Tooting, where my daughter went to start at a secondary school.
Okay, but then it was the Islamic school there, yeah.
That's right. Now, talking about Kenya, in the firm that I was, we were representing a particular client to prevent him from extradition to America. And one of the charges was him being a mastermind behind the Kenyan bombing. So I had the file. I had all the deceased, 226 deceased. I had all of the pictures there, and I saw the sheer horror. I used to work in the Crown Prosecution Service. I was used to seeing these things, but not on that sheer scale of seeing body parts and everything like that. Now, the point I'm going to come to on that, and I think we're gonna have to go into that a lot in detail, is everything you said is correct, and I'm with you. And this is how what you said starts and looks like. 2 days after 9/11, when I was moving one of my families into a gated community, Muslim community. And I remember as we were moving in that day, some 4 white individuals knocked on the door. And as you said, it was a nice autumn time. It was warm and sunny, and they were suited. What they had sweat on the top lip. He asked me if I was who I was, and he flashed a badge at me, but I was looking at his eyes and I was looking at the other ones behind, because I could tell they were armed, the way they were standing. Okay, so I thought, okay, interesting. They asked for a particular individual who used to be the landlord and landlady of 𝙎𝙤𝙚𝙖. So I was like, oh, okay, what's going on here? That's when I first became aware that he'd been detained. So I said, it's not this house. Maybe try one of the other ones further up. And then I left. I told my wife, I'm going up the road. I've got to pick up something. And as I was going down towards the gates to open them up, the car that was there with some other individuals who were clearly, when they flashed the badge, CIA agents, I think, and American accents. So I saw they were very, very jumpy. So I got out of the car very slowly, very calmly, and walked towards them, because I saw they weren't going to let me get out, leave the premises, the gates, the community. And I gave them one of my cards and said, this is who I am. Is there anything you need to speak to me about? I said, no, it's okay. Then they reversed their car and let me drive out. I got 200 yards up the road and my phone rang. And they said, this is such and such. You've just given us your card. Please turn around immediately now and come back. I parked the car. I rang one of the brothers, one of the trustees, Shura members, and I said to him, please call our solicitor. Okay. He said, what's up? I said, things are taking a turn for the worse. I went back to them and they started grilling me. Now, that was the start, Abdul. The reason I'm bringing that is because they didn't leave it alone then. They mentioned 𝙎𝙤𝙚𝙖𝙡. They mentioned that they've got this address in his address book, and they're looking for certain individuals. And that our community, the Brixton community, then became targeted. I want you to, that word is key. We became targeted. Okay. So, and now I'm going to move to the other point that you've mentioned. That's a way when communities are targeted, when individuals are targeted, and in other societies, when they are repressed, when they are brutalized, when their wives are abused and everything, all under the security apparatus, it can have and often does have a radicalizing effect.
Yeah,
okay? Now, when you're
it's
being
so well known.
Exactly, when you're being treated as a criminal. So one thing I did, Abdurraheem, I'm thinking on my feet now. It's like, we haven't done anything. We've always fought terrorism. We haven't got any information to give them. We can only talk about our ideology. We can only talk about who we are. And we can only distance ourselves from extremists. And that's what we sought to do. Now, that put us in quagmire with Muslims saying you can't speak out against Islam and Muslims to anyone. And the authorities saying you're withholding information. And so therefore we're going to target you even more. So much so that we had individuals being, when they left the mosque, they were being pursued. Some were being taken. They were being questioned, like myself, everything. And they'd be saying, look, we've been questioned. They were showing us pictures of you. The community was under stress. We felt under siege. So that happened, Abdurraheem, as I said.
I mean, that soon happened to everyone.
It did.
And the reality is it's still going on now.
Exactly.
I mean, maybe it's normal, like I guess a chronic pain. Yeah. Yes. When it starts, it's really horrible, but somehow your brain just adjusts to it, and it's still there. It still hurts, but you sort of become a bit numb to it, because I don't think it's really stopped, has it?
Right. You know? So Abdurraheem, that, as you said, so that was happening. But I think what we need to look at in that instance as well is, as Muslims, there wasn't a rule book as such to say how each and everyone was going to react. Now, what we did immediately is, one of our brothers, he's since passed away, he was traveling to Jordan. So we said, you need to go to the scholars with some questions for us, please. And then call us when you're there. So we said on that day, on 9/11, when I had that meeting with the Shura, with the committee, I said to them, a storm is coming. A storm is coming. We need to prepare. And I said, at least let's make a generic statement that Islam is like many people were doing. Okay. But we knew we were going to be targeted more. Now, I gave a khutbah on that Thursday. We spoke to the scholars. They advised us. They said, speak about what Islam is and what it isn't. Okay. That's all you can do. Don't speak about anyone. I said, no, we're not going to speak out about anyone. We're just going to speak about the ideology and who we are. And our brothers were supposed to do that. Now, the first Friday that followed, the following Friday after 9/11, I gave a sermon, which brothers had told me they'd traveled from different parts of London. We were one of the few mosques, as you well know, that delivered the sermon in English. And I addressed this head on. And that sermon is still there. It's on my podcasts, Inside Out of Prevent, and about one of them about the KHAIR ideology. And because we still weren't sure, I spoke down the line. I've started with that, as I told you, the bully got a bloody nose, spoke about the hegemony of America and what it had done, and the devastation it had wrought across the world in different societies and everything, the bloodshed from Vietnam to whatever. I mentioned all of that. But then I also mentioned, with a big if this has been done in the name of our religion, then I connected it back to the Khawarij and their ideology and what happened on that occasion. But still highlighting, because Muslims were now trying to distance themselves, saying whoever did this, if they say they're Muslims, this takes them out of Islam. You had liberal Muslims making takfir on takfiris, which was wrong.
This is, look, bro. Let's. I want to use this as a point to get to a very important issue, right? Because I think you've raised something that has to be dealt with, right? And I guess it's like almost in reverse, right? But the point that I want to make, and you can pick up on it, because to be honest, bro, I think here this is the most interesting. It really is interesting hearing what you got to say, and that lived experience of leading a community through those times is just so different. But yeah, so the thing that I want to address is this: Muslims never did 9/11. Yeah, it was a big conspiracy. You know, obviously it was a false flag operation. It was done by George Bush, or at least, you know, the CIA knew about it. Mossad knew about it. They didn't stop it happening. I mean, there's a whole range of, you know, possibilities, from they outright planned the thing, right, to they knew it was going to happen, but they didn't really stop it. And I guess those are all the, they're all framed as some sort of conspiracy theory. Yeah. But obviously, we don't know the whole truth. But one thing I think we need to put to rest, and this is what I'm going to say, and then you can comment on my statement. Yeah. That whatever you want to believe about 9/11, maybe you want to believe it's a conspiracy theory and that Muslims had nothing to do with it. Right. I would say, first of all, I would like to point out that even if that was true, do not delude yourself that there are Muslims who they call themselves Muslims and we do not have a right to expel them from Islam, right? Doing this does not make them not Muslim. It may make them deviant. It may make them astray. It may make them major sinners. It may, all of those things, right? But you don't have the right to throw someone out of Islam like that, right? And we should be very cautious about that. Okay, so just for your convenience, because you want to say, oh, they're not Muslim, really? Yeah, no, that's not Islam either to say that. Right. Let's be honest about ourselves. There are people who call themselves Muslims. They pray 5 times a day. They fast. They probably read more Quran than you and all the rest of it. And they would not only be, they not only support this type of activity, they condone it. They would happily do it. And if they didn't do 9/11, they would have been happy to do it. They would have been proud to do it. Yeah. I know these people exist. 100% I know they exist.
Right.
You, Abdul Haqq, you know those people exist because you and me have dealt with them. We've argued with them. We've debated with them. We know they exist. So anyone who's saying, oh, there are no Muslims like that, you are delusional, right? And you don't live in planet reality. Yeah, you need to get real. The people who would like to do this, they exist, right? So that's my first,
Abdurraheem, to come on that point then. Yes.
And like, what does that mean then in terms of what really happened in 9/11? Because I'm getting from you that you have some very clear proof that there are people who were involved in this. This is not just some
Abdurraheem, look, right? let me put
I mean, I'm saying there are Muslims who are involved in this.
So Abdurraheem, let's say what you said was coined so beautifully. Jazakallah khair. Okay, many are saying it's conspiracy theories and everything like this. Okay, I want to address that in 2 ways.
Yeah.
I knew Zacarias Moussaoui.
Yeah.
Okay, I knew him.
Yeah.
We knew him in the community. I know the discussions that I had with him one-to-one. I know what his ideological beliefs and underpinnings were. So much so that I told him not to come back he was no longer welcome in the mosque after years of attending and going down this road of radicalization and violent radicalization. He was one who was belligerent and very proud of his beliefs. He wasn't subduing or hiding his beliefs. So I'm saying here to everyone, and
let me ask you a question, bro. Sorry, I need to ask you a question about that, bro. In these discussions with, what was his name?
Zacarias Moussaoui.
Zacarias Moussaoui. In these discussions with Zacarias Moussaoui, did you have specific discussions about the permissibility of targeting civilians or targeting, basically, committing acts of terrorism?
Yes.
Specifically,
we had the discussions that we were in a place of Dar al-Harb, as you know, an abode of war, and that the non-Muslims' lives and everything else was halal to destroy and take. And as you know, Abdurraheem, yourself, one of his leaders and protagonists who he used to go to had made takfir upon us, saying our wives were halal, as you mentioned last week. So it was very clear to them, to the point, Abdurraheem, let me mention this. He went from, when he disappeared from us after I said he's not welcome here any longer, and we heard he was going amongst Abu Hamza's circles, then the beard became trimmed, and the Islamic garbs or the Palestinian scarves disappeared. And some saw that at the time, as he's no longer practicing, as we saw some Muslims have burnout, he's not practicing very much and the like. We thought that initially, but others of us knew what Dar al-Harb meant, because they used to espouse it. You hide your identity, to blend in, because you do not want the non-Muslims to know who you are. So
Thus, these guys going to nightclubs and discos, and like
exactly
people make
the
fun of it. Oh
girlfriends,
no, practicing
are what
Muslim
your
would do
right
that.
hands possess.
Yeah.
Credit card fraud, all of this, robbing Muslims who come over to the UK in Ramadan because
So
they're
I
coming
just
to
like,
bring.
bro, just pause for a sec, bro. I just like to clarify for every listener, right? Muslim, particularly listener, right? That, you know, like you can put forward some arguments about why you may think 9/11 was a conspiracy, but let's put to bed some things, right, that do make sense if you know the reality on the ground, right? So these people, right, going to nightclubs, right, drinking alcohol is all part of what they believed was allowed for them to do in order to practice their deceit and their cover up and to hide themselves in order to carry out their missions, right? Supposed missions. They believe, and we know that, right? That we know, like you said, credit card fraud, taking any person, any woman, like as a girlfriend, she's not your girlfriend, she's your slave girl and stuff like that. All sorts of stuff that, you know, what can we say? Mainstream Orthodox scholars consider to be totally nonsense, but this is the sort of stuff they would do.
And Abdurraheem,
so that's not that strange.
Exactly. So again, now with 𝙎𝙥𝙚𝙘𝙞𝙖 now, and I'm this is live, this is going out there. When the lawyers came from America for him looking for character witnesses, they came to me. And I said, why are you coming to me? I oppose him. And said, well, none of his friends or colleagues who had the same extremist tendencies would come forward to give evidence on his behalf. And we want to avert the death penalty from him. So Abdurraheem, again, thinking on my feet.
Just to remind me, what was 𝙎𝙤𝙚𝙘𝙞𝙖? What was his, was he on a particular one of the airplanes?
No, remember, he was detained, okay, but he'd been having flight lessons. And Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, even though we say that his evidence was given under duress, this is what I saw and it was proven, it confirmed that he was supposed to be the 20th bomber. And in his own testimony, okay, he got rid of his own defense lawyer, he wanted to defend himself, and he spoke very clearly. When you speak to his brother, okay, his brother from France spoke concerning and confirmed his narrative. His mother, I met his mother years later and we spoke concerning that. But now he gave testimony. This is the point now, Abdurraheem. When they asked me to be a character witness to avert the death sentence, I put two caps on. I knew that if he got martyrdom at the hands of the great Satan, as he saw, that would elevate him in the sight of his extremist friends. He's got martyrdom in this way.
You should have just told them that, right?
Like, no, but
he also make it worse by killing him.
No, exactly. But also at the same time, from my perspective as a Muslim, I don't agree that any Muslim should be put to death at the hands of a Western democracy, as it were. I find that hypocritical in itself. Just like the Taliban was saying, yes, we'll hand over Osama bin Laden if he's going to be tried in a Muslim country or whatever. I had those beliefs and still have those beliefs regarding Muslims in that instance, because the criteria of judgment is different. But anyway, now, when I gave the character statement on his behalf in that regard, and the court trial was there and everything like that, he remained silent. He did not rebut anything I'd said, which he could have done. He's a liar. No, what he's saying is wrong. He acknowledged everything I said as a character witness regarding him. So let's go back to, we're talking about 9/11 now. His statements, his comments, his behavior, what I knew of him, what others knew of him, and others who have since left extremism have come and verified even more than what I verified, and I'm doing so now. So he did have that belief. This was something he wanted to participate in. He's never denied that. He's never rejected that particular claim. And then there's another thing, Abdurraheem. I then met one of the victim's daughters who was witness at the trial. Okay. She then traveled to the UK, Carrie Lamack. I met her and we did something collaboratively where I wanted to explain to her what Islam was. And we did a sort of We traveled around in the local area to schools and colleges, spoke to students, went to some of the mosques as well, and they were shocked to meet her. She had a picture of her mum, and she explained that her mum was in one of the planes that hit the Twin Towers. Now, when they heard, some of them actually said, we thought it was a conspiracy. She said, no, it's not a conspiracy. She said, every time a body part of my mother is found weeks later, we have to undergo another funeral ceremony. So an ear has been found, and then maybe 6 months later, a year later, the nose is found, a toe from the DNA. So speaking with her, so I'm saying this now, why? Because that graphic reality, when someone says it's a conspiracy, the fact of the matter is,
let's not go too much in these details. They're very interesting, bro. But
no, I won't get into detail. But Abdurraheem, what I want to say is this: the point of the matter is, conspiracy or not or whatever, people died. And there were people, as you said, who would have wished for this to happen.
Okay, but I mean, look, people are going to say things like, okay, like I look, at the end of the day, that's the one thing I want to get clear. For me, I don't really have another agenda in this particular discussion we're going to have tonight, except to let that everybody needs to know who's Muslim and who's listening. There are people who are Muslim who would do this, happy to do it. And, you know, so to claim that, oh, Muslims wouldn't do something like that, get real. Yeah, you don't understand. You're living on the wrong planet, which is maybe a nice thing. I'm glad you live on that planet where you don't have to meet people who are like that, right? Good for you. Alhamdulillah. But from the point of view of just saying that, it's wrong. Look, for me, where we go from there, right? It's not that I don't think there are some very strange things about what happened. There are some massive irregularities. There are big question marks. But I think the next thing, we can just skip them because, you know, for me, it's one of those things you're only going to know when you meet Allah on the Day of Judgment. Right. It's just like I have, you know, like I said to one of my Instagram followers, I've read books on this stuff. I've watched untold numbers of videos. I've read books. I've read the books from the engineers who've said it's not possible that airplanes could have done this and that. I've been there, done that. At the end of the day, look, I honestly don't know. But what I do know 100% is that a bunch of neocons, right, with George Bush, Donald Rumsfeld, right, and what's that other, you know, those bunch of real shayateen devils? What was the other one? His name? There was like a trinity of them.
There was, yeah.
Rumsfeld. There was Bush, Rumsfeld, and what was the other guy?
I can't remember who the other one.
I think that the Bush is the only one alive, left alive. But anyway, these guys, they were these neoconservatives. Now, there is no doubt that you can find, this is not hidden, this is not conspiracy, that amongst those people, amongst their circle and that group of people who are thinking, they were talking about, we need to revive America, we need to bring back American power. They were talking about a Pearl Harbor-like event that would need to happen to galvanize everybody. They had already planned, and I know this for a fact, they had already planned the invasion of Iraq before 9/11. They had already planned it. Right. And I know this for a fact. I mean, we can prove this. They had planned the invasion of Iraq before 9/11. Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with 9/11, yet 57% of Americans believe that he was involved, and he had nothing to do with it, right?
And you're right. Abdurraheem, you're right.
So one thing is absolutely, let me finish, bro. One thing that is absolutely sure without any shadow of a doubt, that whatever happened with 9/11, let's believe the account that a group of 20 individuals led by Osama bin Laden, masterminded by Zarqawi, whatever his name was, whoever they were, right? They plotted this thing and they carried it out. Yet what America unleashed on the Muslim world in terms of death and destruction was completely and totally disproportionate to what a bunch of people who have nothing to do, which most Muslims, 90% of Muslims, would totally disagree with their ideology, right, with their methodology. Yet how many hundreds of thousands, millions of Muslims died as a consequence of it, right? That is something that no one should ever forget. If there's something that should not be forgotten about 9/11, yes, it was horrific. But what was even more horrific is how America and the West used that as an excuse to literally, as that book I sent you a link for, cause holocausts across the Muslim world.
Right. And Abdurraheem, absolutely. I'm glad you've made that point, and I agree 100%. The complicity that was there is evident. And we only have to look, for example, when you go back to the Chechen conflict, the initial Chechen conflict. And if you remember preceding that, we saw a series of bombings in mainland Russia. And they said that that was done by Chechen separatists to justify.
It was done by,
exactly. And the evidence was there. They did that to their own people. So complicity, yes.
Anna Polotz, I can never remember say her name, Anna Polotskaya or whatever, who got killed. She wrote books on this.
Right. So there was so we've got examples of complicity of the US, their hawkish strategies. No doubt. There's one very, I think you said you've read things and watched things likewise. I think Adam Curtis's Power of Nightmares was a very
powerful documentary.
Excellent documentary. Yeah, they are. So for me, the parallels that he brought were very, very powerful. So Abdurraheem, I agree entirely with you. I think how we responded as Muslims, some of us tried to get ahead of the curve and take the front foot to say, this is who we are, this is what Muslims are about. This is what Islam's about. Then you had others who jumped completely the other way to say, yes, all of the Muslims, except, for example, us, the Sufis, for example. And you had organizations,
you had all of them jumping on that,
and the others who went in that particular direction. Now, I think that what then happened, and what is the tragedy amongst this as well, is that while we are being targeted, and as we've been targeted as Muslims, the internecine disputes and splits and ruptions amongst us have become even wider. Okay, even wider, when it should have been a time, and it should still be a time, where we are looking to unite within a wider Western context, because there's an onslaught against us. Let's make no bones about that. 20 years on, we've seen what's happening in Afghanistan, but everyone seems to be looking at that at the moment. But what about what's happening across the Muslim societies in the African continent? Let's look at what's happening with the Uyghurs and how there's silence there. Let's look at how, and I will talk as one who has experience of this, Abdurraheem. Let's look at how particular policies like Prevent Mark II, I know Prevent Mark I, I was involved in that, how that morphed into targeting our children now. Many who are listening to this were either really very young or not even born at the time.
That's true.
So they're unaware of what preceded this, and the freedom, I'd say, the autonomy, as we mentioned last week, that we had. So now,
we talked about that in previous podcasts. We talked about it a lot. If you listen back to previous episodes, we've had these conversations.
And so we don't need to repeat. But the point is here, Abdurraheem, 20 years on, yes, what happened on 9/11 is a tragedy beyond proportions. But what is even worse than that, as they're commemorating the 2,900 or something short of 3,000 names, what about the tens, hundreds of thousands, if not, let's talk about millions of unknown names of Muslims who have died at the hands of not only
nothing to do with it, never supported
it. Who have died and are unknown because their societies don't count as much as the West, and not only at the hands of Western hegemonic strategies and violence, but also at the hands of those who are calling them casualties of war from amongst our ranks as Muslims. What about those names? What about the suffering that they continue to endure? That's far worse, far worse than what happened in 9/11, because it's been sustained for 20 years, and before that even, it just didn't make the headlines.
Yeah, bro, I think that's a great place to leave it, to be honest. There's so much more we could say about this. Honestly, I could keep talking and talking, but I'll be honest, I'm feeling a bit shattered today. I've got a bit of a headache. You can see me keep rubbing my head. I don't know.
No,
The
mashallah.
stress of 9/11. It's not that. It's not. It's something else anyway. But yeah, bro, it's been amazing. I think maybe we should pick up on this conversation. It's very interesting. There's a few things I did want to pick up on, and we'll talk about a very interesting website, Watson Brown, Costs of War. It's this basically these guys, Western academics and people who they wanted to present to the West the real cost of the war in terms of how much money it cost, how many actual lives of human beings have died. We should have a look at that. And
Yes.
also that, just the chapter headings of that book that I sent you the link for, because it will make for really interesting for you and me to go through that. And
right.
Just to remind ourselves,
yes,
and everybody else, of what is really going on,
and it can't be.
And
You're
that
right.
9/11 was just an excuse to commit really basically a Holocaust on the Muslim world. And I think
Right.
when you really analyze it and you look at it, we're really not exaggerating to say that.
No.
We're really not. We'll look at the numbers, we'll look at the reality, look at the facts. I'm just gonna finish from my point, bro. When I said that, I know that the invasion of Iraq was planned before 9/11. It's because I was involved in a charity that was one of the few charities in UK that could actually openly work in Iraq. Anyway, I don't want to go into the whole story, but I was going to run a campaign for them, and I wanted to give this campaign a certain name, and they wouldn't let me call it that name. And the reason they said is that years before 9/11, the Americans had a big fair, and it was called Rebuild Iraq. And in that fair, they were actually selling off bits of Iraq to major corporations, hotel chains, fast food chains. They were selling it off. Bro, like the Prophet said, they were gathered together and take from you like you share in a feast. They were literally parceling out Iraq and who can buy what way before 9/11. And he said you can't call that campaign, you can't call your campaign Rebuild Iraq. It's too painful for us because of that. And he said to me, I spent 2 weeks, bro, 2 weeks immersing myself in documentaries and literature about what had happened in Iraq. The brother who I was working with, he said, we consider that what the American invasion of Iraq is worse than the Mongols, worse than what the Mongols did. The Mongols were not as bad as the Americans and what happened to our country. That's just to give you an idea. I mean, anyone who's familiar with Islamic history will be like, wow, that is horrific.
Yeah.
So anyway, bro, that's my input for now. It's been amazing, bro, hearing your. I mean, I was just quiet most of the time because it was like, wow, this is just such interesting stuff.
No, your input, I think what the context you've given, I think complements what was being discussed from a personal perspective and looking at it in the context that you've mentioned. And I think that where you've left it is a nice place to leave it. We're not going to do what we're seeing in the media, mainstream media. This is going to continue. There's so much we need to discuss following the events of 9/11. There's so much to cover. So I think that you're right. We need to revisit or continue this rather next week and cover some other aspects of importance, inshallah.
Yeah, bro, that's great. And over there, that one over there is Dr. You, bro. Yeah,
and that one, Abdul Haqq Baker, and that one over there is our beloved brother.
It's Abdurraheem Green, and this has been a
piece of cake.
Until next time, brothers and sisters, if Allah gives us life, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakallah khair, bro.